those are the folks I have in mind. I have the young folks in mind. I mean, I'm thinking, as I said, I'm thinking of folks mainly in their 20s, young 20s, and what can they learn? And so the questions I have for you are very general.
Let me say one thing first.
Sure.
One of the young group that you're talking about in that age group,
Yeah.
a lot of them that are in the military that go for a tour. This is a joint assignment tour, and they're the ones that deploy to the field around the world to do the recoveries. Their motivation, they come away from that just absolutely impressed, influenced by the fact that our government goes to that lengths to find people from the Korean War, World War II, but Vietnam War is our focus, but because of us, we have World War II in Korea. So they come away very, very influenced in the right way, in the way you're talking about.
Well, I identify with that completely, because as you say that, I'm thinking actually of a young woman that I had a conversation with. She's with the DPAA and was on one of these recovery missions in Vietnam. They spend 5 weeks. In that 5 weeks, they find one tooth and a medallion, but that's enough to make the ID. And it was so compelling. I mean, that story, and so impressive in every respect.
And they're so thrilled. The people that are in the field that did the recovery, when they can find something that is possibly identifiable, they feel just so thrilled that they contributed to that, whether it's the scientists or the, the young guys out doing most of the digging, or, whatever their role.
That's right. And it's a marvelous mix of, the terms I use are kind of brain work and soul work, because you've got to be pretty smart to pull this stuff off. Also takes an incredible amount of perseverance. I mean, 5 weeks, and I think they went, if I remember correctly, something like 4 weeks without finding anything.
Yeah.
You stick to it.
Often the case.
Yeah, but then you...
And in Vietnam War, it's so different, because the challenges in Vietnam War, they're not going to find significant amounts of remains, especially in the aircraft incidents, which are the primary focus on Vietnam War. Unlike recoveries in the field of remains of people that were buried as they were killed by U.S. forces or others, but known to have been dead and buried, not recovered yet, especially in North Korea. But in World War II, the way that they're recovering remains and disinterring remains, they find almost entire skeletons. So it's a matter of very different from Vietnam. But there's two kinds of Vietnam too, not only the one you're talking about, but we don't yet have all of the remains that were verified with solid evidence as having been recovered and stored by the Vietnamese. And out of the 400 plus that were counted as being part of that, and very clear solid evidence and evaluation and assessment by CIA and others, it was over 400. And the only ones that I'm aware of yet, now I'd asked the question recently, are there other remains that show evidence of long-term storage? You would never find that in the kind you're talking about, because they've never been stored, unless they recovered the majority of the remains, and all that was left in the site is what they recovered in the field.
Yeah, so
it can be a number of things, is my point.
Yeah. To return to a point you made a minute ago, the finding remains, particularly in Vietnam, and as a result of plane crashes, that's one because of just what happens with the impact of a plane, and then what happens to remains.
And that varies widely.
Explosion. And then the soil, the acidity of the soil makes will lead to the rapid decomposition of remains. Well, here's a question that that is actually on my list. And before we started recording, I said normally I come into interviews with just kind of I don't usually have specific questions written down. In this case, I do. And one of the specific questions I have, and here again, I'm thinking of young people who are thinking of doing diplomatic work. You have, it's extraordinary to listen to you in committee meetings, congressional committee meetings, etc., to read things that you write where you've had so many interactions with, Vietnamese officials at the highest levels. Also Laos, also Cambodia. In my own mind, I'm thinking of Vietnam. In this particular historical moment where it seems like the United States and Vietnam have a common interest in strengthening their relationship.
Absolutely.
You have played a really important part in the evolution of the relationship between the United States and Japan. So I guess I'm sorry, the United States and
I
Vietnam.
know what you mean.
Yeah, the United States and Vietnam. I guess there are two questions. One, can you say, we're talking about hundreds of interactions here over the decades, but if you could sort of make a general statement on how or what you've been able to do in terms of the relationship between the United States and Vietnam in relation to the issue you're interested in. And then the second question would be, what advice would you have for younger people who are interested in getting into diplomatic work, especially in relation to Vietnam?
Okay. Well, to answer the first part of the question, and then just tell me if I'm getting off track. There's so much.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
You asked for my contribution to that. First of all, there's no such thing as a single person's contribution. And I was privileged to be in a unique role at a very special time in this issue and in the earliest years of trying to build a relationship with Vietnam that had never existed before, unlike Laos, where we had a relationship already ongoing.
Right.
But with Vietnam, not so. It was a different country. So it was a combination of President Reagan's priority that he said that resolution of this issue would be a matter of the highest national priority. And the preparations and planning that the Vietnamese government, their leadership, Communist Party Politburo authorized and directed, knowing that accounting for our POWs and MIAs would be a priority of the U.S. government. So in their minds, they're the ones that really initiated that ability to talk to each other directly on this issue as a groundwork level and fundamentally important issue, but gave them all both countries, all participants, kind of immunity from the political and national security things that were ongoing at the time, which is why we developed this framework for contact, even though it was never truly separate from the building of the relationship. As a separate humanitarian issue that we could pursue regardless of other issues that divide.
But as that's happening, relations are being formed, right? Connections are made. Trust.
The earliest years, the reason why my role was important and why they included me as a real partner in this, not like in today's terms, but a real partner in developing the policy and initiating those fundamental and early contacts directly with the Deputy Prime Minister / Foreign Minister of Vietnam, Nguyen Co Thach. He was, in fact, the Vietnamese pioneer of the relationship and building a future for Vietnam. And it was Nguyen Co Thach. I've never really counted up the hours that particularly Richard Childress, who was the National Security Council staff member for policy, dealing with Southeast Asia, in particular, in this case, we're speaking Vietnam. But I set up the first meeting between him and Nguyen Co Thach at a hotel in New York City, where my brother happened to be working for Shell Oil International. They had a permanent suite at one of the, overlooking Central Park. can't remember the name of the hotel, but it's documented elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so I set up that first meeting, and very, very quietly, and nobody knew until after it had taken place, except the president, national security advisor, very select circle. But that was the first opening discussion, and it was very interesting.
And
and I'll never forget.
Do you remember what year that was? Roughly?
It was 83, I think, in the fall of 83.
Wow. So let's fast forward then to, I mean, fairly recent news that I think a lot of folks who have a sense of the history of the United States and Vietnam would find fairly remarkable. And that is an aircraft carrier, an American aircraft carrier, paying a port of call visit to, I believe, Da Nang, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
When you heard about that, there must have been something that went through your mind that said, I have something to do with that. I mean.
Oh, it was more than something.
Yeah.
I was for years talking to, on trips I would make to Asia, and if I could arrange to go through PACOM, for instance, or now called Indo-Pac, headquarters in Hawaii, where our operational headquarters is now. It was very different in those days, much smaller, priority just building. And then subsequent to those initial visits, I would meet with Navy leadership, PACOM commander, PAC fleet commander, and talk to them about the importance of working on shared humanitarian objectives to build the military-to-military relationship that you see today. Yes, there would be people who say, well, how could she just go and meet with the PACOM commander or PAC fleet commander? And people who knew me in the history would say to them, you may not think so, but watch her do it. And it was always, I didn't exploit those. I did not publicize those. It's a U.S. government meeting. I was there to try to encourage them to reinforce the importance of the United States and Vietnam developing a relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And the fundamental core was cooperation to meet the requirements that initially were put in post-Reagan in the roadmap to normalization, which I helped write and sell to the U.S. government bureaucracy as viable.
So this is, I mean, yeah. So the term I have in my mind is a term I don't like, but we hear it a lot these days: safe space. So this issue sort of provided a safe space for the two countries that had an obvious bad relationship.
Politically a safe space.
Yeah, for people to work on something that was fairly safe, humanitarian, but in the process, relationships are being built, communication is being made. Let me pull you into a room of young aspiring diplomats. They're in their mid-20s, early 30s, and I'm just the scenario I'm putting up. They're on their way to to do things related to Vietnam, and I walk you into the room, and you've got about 2 minutes to tell them, here's my insight into how the government of Vietnam operates, or here's my insight into how to work with the Vietnamese. What would you say?
Number one is be informed. Be informed about the history of whatever issue you're dealing with, whether that is in today's world, the national security interest and regional security in what they call Indo-Pacific region now, which means the PRC, ASEAN, all of the countries involved, but particularly with disturbances in the South China Sea. So if you're there for national security, you need to be intimately familiar with the history of that evolution.
Yeah.
But the first thing is be educated about the culture, about their governmental process. Things are definitely Politburo policy driven. Everything else is operational. It's totally cohesive, consistent, informed, and they know the history all the way through. Unlike too many in our country, it's short term, it's immediate. People come in, they think they know a lot. I have records that far surpass many that I've seen and often am called by people in the State Department or DOD or whatever, do you have anything on this? And I will, because I was brought into it exactly for that reason. When I was there, it was obviously focused on POWMIA. Why else would this civilian, who's head of the National League of POWMI Families, be included in the first ever high-level policy delegations, for instance, or on the Vesey missions after Genoa Vesey was appointed by President Reagan, or after that, even in the Clinton administration, when Herschel Gober, who was at the time head of the VA or deputy head of the VA, I can't remember, but also on those delegations, then many that we took on our own, usually we kind of broke things open when we first went in 1982. But after that, and after the Reagan administration brought seriousness and priority, I would go and lead a delegation, or since, to break a logjam, or where there was a disconnect and things were falling apart. It's the reason that to this day, the Vietnamese, I stay in touch with them, they stay in touch with me. And it's not because they have to. It's because I always tell everybody the truth. And sometimes, and I have been there from the beginning, so they know that I know the history. They don't have to teach anybody, that their counterpart officials or anybody else. They know that I know, and therefore it's easier. I don't have a chain of command, which is threatening to some people, not to people that are self-assured or intelligent, but bureaucratically it can be threatening because I don't have a, quote, boss. So that makes it threatening to insecure people. Vietnamese don't worry about that. They know that I'm going to tell them the truth. Now, sometimes it's not easy, but as long as you disagree respectfully and say why and can verify it, what can they do but say, we understand what you're saying?
Sure.
And it doesn't make anger. It's like, she does know what she's talking about here.
Yeah.
And
your impression then, so the next question I have, and just listening to you, I mean, a lot of things are coming to my mind.
Sure.
Although I know
that happened.
When I, have been in Vietnam recently, I'm talking to people on the street, just kind of Joe Blow, Vietnamese guy.
I've done it many times.
Yeah, but I'm asking, I'm asking them kind of geopolitical questions, and what I have heard many times is, we want and need to be closer to the United States because of our mutual concern about China, or
absolutely, or Russia.
Yeah, and so what I'm hearing on the streets comports with what you're hearing at higher levels. Well,
absolutely. Yeah. The Vietnamese, very intelligent, very hardworking, very educated. Education is so important to them. And they have come light years. During the time that I've been going to Vietnam for my first visit, there were no cars other than black Ladas on the street. It was all bicycles or walking. It's like today Hanoi looks like Bangkok did in 1982 or more.
Scooters and the millions of scooters.
Yeah, all the steps, and they're very cohesively implemented. I have tremendous admiration for the work ethic, the education ethic, and the manner in which they implement their policy. Now, do I agree with all their policies? Absolutely not.
Right. Yeah.
But the manner in which they implement, truth is beneficial to the fatherland.
Yeah. Here's a question that I was not intending to ask, and you may just want to set it aside, because I know that
I'll just say so if I do.
Yeah, your focus has been Indochina, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. Right now things with North Korea, don't seem like they're moving along as well as maybe they were, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. But I do know that, there's hope that teams can eventually get back into North Korea and do recovery work. Do you have any thoughts about that? Any words of advice, words of counsel in relation to that? You know, the prospect of going back into North Korea and doing recovery operations there?
Sure, I do. Uh, because I went through the whole structural process of building the relationship post-war, uh, not that I was the one. I mean, Armitage and Childress and Gaston Seeger. I mean, Paul Wolfowitz. I could name you many, many, many who were very influential. And, you know, even at first convincing them that I was part of the process, but I was in the interagency policy group before they came into office. So, you know, it was like inherited on their part, but also I'd proven I was trustworthy. And when you're talking national security and foreign policy issues, and you have a clearance to do so,
Yeah.
then you know there are things you don't talk about publicly. But at the same time, when the DPRK situation arose, and I know how, basically, and why, point 4 was put in there. And if you look at the history and success of building the relationship with Vietnam with a communist-led, Politburo-led, certainly not open and free environment,
Yeah.
and the DPRK being even more so, and the support of the veterans and this president's support for the military, the veterans, it made sense that he would want to. And Secretary Pompeo, from his time at the CIA too, helped us in getting the long-standing Air America CIA civilian flight recovery in northwestern Laos, which we'd known the location of for years, but it had not been done because it was outside of the quote north-south approach that the U.S. government had imposed on itself to expedite the process, not because they didn't care about an incident, but to them, wiser use of assets and resources, north-south, you know, is more economical, more efficient, and potentially much more productive by doing it that way. Well, Secretary Pompeo, when he was director, got directly engaged and agreed to a meeting with the families of those that were missing unaccounted for from that CIA Air America incident. Most people, and then it was DPMO before DPAA,
Yeah.
were dismissive. They said, he's not gonna, you know. I said, which part of this don't you understand? They wanted me to come to the meeting. Well, the meeting was on the opening day of the League's annual meeting. So there was no way that I could go. And I said, I'll be helpful in any way. Of course, tell him I'll be glad to talk to him in any way as background and supplemental to your visit, but I can't do it. Encourage DPMO to send their van over to pick the families up and take them to this meeting. They were dismissive. They said, nah, he's not going to do that. And so I argued with them and said, which word of I'm telling you it's happening, do you not understand here? Well, they took too long. So I called the CIA people and said, please send a car over to pick them up. So they did. And Secretary Pompeo met them all. And because of that, suddenly this case had a lot of priority. And now he's Secretary of State. And he's, you know, he's an academy grad. He's military. He has affinity for those who serve our country. This issue falls into that. And I think he is, he's doing a fine job in working with the Vietnamese and the Lao and the Cambodians, mostly with Vietnam, of course.
Yeah. Do you have a sense in the conversations you have that, you know, that there is a hope at the highest levels to get back into North Korea to do recovery operations? Is that?
I would like to hear more about it, and I would like to see more acceptance of separate humanitarian in dealing with the DPRK. It would have to be very trusted, informed individuals who would proactively follow the guidance as directed by the White House and the State Department, of course. But I certainly don't. I certainly know that they know the advantages of it. Does
What
it?
do North Koreans do?
Um, the North Koreans do, or they wouldn't agree to it and already sent some, which turned out to be a whole lot more remains, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
But the advantages of having this channel and utilizing it are understood by both sides. At the same time, you get a lot of restriction on our side. Well, this is going to look as though we're moving forward, despite they're continuing to have nuclear weapons, and despite this, and despite that. If you reinforce the fact that it's separate and humanitarian in implementation, you can do it anyway. We know you can, and it has been done, and it sends the right signals to the PRC, Russia, and all of ASEAN, in particular Vietnam.
I hear that, right. And the experience in Vietnam really sort of provides a model, huh?
It was the model.
Yeah,
yes.
Where to go forward.
And a useful, successful model. Look where we are today.
Yeah, I think it's miraculous. I mean, I think, just the idea of an aircraft carrier doing a port of call visit in Da Nang is, I think it's pretty remarkable. And you.
Well, we've had our hospital ships in there too, and
exactly that's
doing underwater Navy activities and training. And
yeah,
we're continuing to do more things and look at opportunities, and they'll run ideas by me, and then I'll,
That's fantastic. Yeah, when I was there, I think 2 times back, they mentioned one of our Navy hospital ships, I think, making a visit to Nha Trang, if I remember right, and a lot of the civilians going on board.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another question. It's kind of has to do with your own personal thought processes. As I listened to an interview with you that is housed at West Point's Oral History Project, and then I listened to you give an address fairly recently to the Veterans of Foreign Wars. Used a well-known phrase from Shakespeare's play Hamlet, more in sorrow than in anger. And so you use that phrase, I think, in these two events, which together are about 2 hours long. I think you use that phrase 3 times. And as you think about your work, which has spanned these decades, what is it about that phrase that's become important to you, so that you've used it at least, fairly recently?
Well, because it's just a reality that whatever you say, particularly if it's critical or without saying, you're on your what, and that's stupid, there's a different way to say things as long as you're honest and respectful and you don't call people names or, in other words, it's a matter of mutual respect, whether you're dealing with senior communist officials or officials at any level. And the same thing with Americans and American officials. People are people. And if you can say you're on your what in a nice way and respectfully, then that to me is saying, look, I'm sorry you don't understand this and you haven't yet learned this, but here's the reality. That's what you're really doing.
Yeah.
So it is more in sorrow than anger. I don't want to be disagreeable.
Yeah.
I don't want to say you're on your what,
sure.
But here's the reality.
Yeah.
Respectfully.
Sure. Now that gets to another question, and I know this is huge, and you've got separate things that come up through the years. So again, I'm looking big picture. But one of the things I would have assumed before I, paid any attention to this, one of the things I would have assumed is that, this mission, this project you've been part of for decades, the fullest possible accounting of prisoners of war missing in action, focused on Vietnam, but of course you've done other things as well, focusing on other conflicts. I would have assumed, okay, well, this is the mission where people would just naturally just get together and get it done, right? Because this is the mission that transcends everybody, and therefore ego's not going to be a problem. and resume building isn't going to be an issue. That's I just would have assumed that of all the possible issues, this is the one where there would just be a sort of a natural unanimity that would form as people are, moving forward together. But I've gathered that that's not the case, that there's just been a lot of tension and so on. Now we're looking at decades of various things that have come up, but just generally speaking, what in your mind accounts for, just even just getting back to what you were just saying a minute ago, just having these difficult conversations. If the difficult conversations are with the Vietnamese government, I understand that. But difficult conversations within our own government about this. Do you understand the gist of the question? It's just kind of surprising that it's been such tough work.
I've learned a lot about human nature over the years, and I am no psychologist, psychiatrist, or any other kind of specialist that in dealing with people. But I would summarize it in 2 words: human nature. Because people do not want to be perceived as uninformed, even when they are. They want to be perceived as knowing in advance what you're talking about. They want to be perceived as competent, even when they aren't. They want to be perceived as secure in themselves as a person, even when they aren't. Therefore, there's a lot of show but the telling is in the execution. So are some people self-serving? Yeah, doesn't matter the issue. That's just the way they think, is self-serving, me first.
Yeah.
Are there people who are know-it-all mentality? It's also a sign to me of insecurity, but it's still human nature.
Yeah.
Some people just are that way. Some people are showmen or showwomen.
Yeah.
Instead of behind the scenes getting the job done and not caring who gets the credit. It's summed up in 2 words: human nature. And it is worldwide. There are some. But when you're dealing with controlled governments, it's control. It is not as evident as a human characteristic in controlled governments where there's not opportunity for individual shining. It's going to be decided way above your level who's going to shine and who's not. So the freedom to shine means the freedom that you will have to do a good job at what has been authorized and what you've been assigned to do, whatever that is.
Are you kind of implying that in some respects it's maybe sometimes easier to get things done with the other governments than it is within?
Well, you can answer that yourself. I'm not going to say that I prefer a communist government, because I don't.
Right.
I prefer the freedom to choose. Is it easier? I would say probably, just like in a dictatorship.
It's more streamlined. Yeah, it's more streamlined.
Gone. And we see it all the time.
Sure.
It happens every day in controlled environments, such as you have in the PRC, in Russia, in other countries around the world, where you don't have free will. Right. You don't have as much expression of human nature, because to do so will be punishment, possibly by death, or disappearance.
Right. So it's nothing you'd never advocate the system, but there are certain advantages that it might have in terms of getting things.
Sure. Yeah.
Getting things done. Well, so this leads to another question. I was struck by I was listening to a recording of a talk you gave back in 1992, right? And you a quote from that I pulled from that. You're addressing folks in the league, and you use the phrase "tired of the battle." That some of us have wanted to quit. This is 1992, and here you are still at it. I mean, going to the White House tomorrow. So 1992, but you're saying, some of us we're tired of the battle, we've wanted to quit, but then you say, but we will hang in there. And you certainly have kept that promise. We're gonna hang in there. What what is the central thing that has kept you in this? Well, even the word I use, fight. But what is
It
the
is
central
fine.
thing that has kept you at this for for all these years?
That is a very simple explanation. And it's because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do for our country. It's the right thing for our country to do, to stand behind those who serve our country, particularly if captured or missing and their fate is unknown.
Yeah.
That creates uncertainty, not only by fellow veterans, but especially
Mm.
for the families of those that just disappeared. Now, it's different if it was like in World War II or Korean War, where there were ground battles, you knew who was there,
Mm.
you had witnesses, but you couldn't recover remains. That's very different than being missing in action or an unreturned known POW that was alive and either in the hands of a then enemy or in proximity on the ground and about to in proximity to be captured. So those and the disappearing acts are the ones that have the greatest uncertainty. There still is uncertainty if you never have the finality. Most people say closure. It's not a word I like, and I never use it because of that. But if you have finality about what happened, even if it's a sad finality, and even if you don't get remains, and depending on the time frame and the mentality of the country and our own government, in other words, before suspicions came in the Vietnam War, when they were heightened. In World War II, everybody believed the U.S. government. Everybody was at war, one way or another.
Everybody's involved. Yeah.
Yes. And you believed your government in those years. There was no suspicion. There were no leaks. There were no instant communications. It was not a television war with debate over what actually happened. It was like Walter Cronkite talked about the huge battle that was lost. And the Vietnamese General Giap, I heard him say, that was totally wrong. We lost that battle.
Oh, you
But
mean
yeah,
his famous statement about the Tet Offensive in '68?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that they lost.
Yeah.
But it was portrayed in this country as they won. So they won the battle
Mm.
just on television and through the media rather than on the ground. So it's just the way things are, you know.
Yeah. Right.
So it's because I truly believe that it's a very important message to those serving our country today that they know that should they go there and something happened to them, our country will be there to recover them and return them home.
Yeah.
Or try. That's why you said the words fullest possible accounting. It was the league that insisted during the Reagan administration, when the policy was being put together, was rapidly adopted. Our founding documents in 1970, before the end of the war, said fullest possible accounting. And that's because we knew then there would be no such thing as a full or complete accounting. Doesn't happen in past wars. More likely to happen today with nobody listed as unaccounted for or just disappeared.
Right.
It's not likely today. It was in those wars in Vietnam War and wars in further past, but particularly in Vietnam War. Although there were last known alive POW cases in the Korean War that never came back. There's about 300 and some odd, as I recall. And I don't know, I don't think many of those, but I do think that we find more and more as related to the Korean War is in what they call the K208, which were returned many years ago. There turned out to be 550 to 600 actual remains in the 208 transfer cases, as they call them, coffin looking.
Yeah.
Actually 550 to 600 individuals. Some of those were obviously Korean and Allied individuals, but they are way up in the count now, far beyond 208 that they've identified and returned to their families. This latest one, the K-55, last I heard, it was about the remains of roughly 250, and about 80 of those, they believe, are in fact South Korean. But what they do, these are people, many of them can be those last known alive discrepancies from Korean War because they were known to have been captured. So were they in the camps? Yes. Did they die? High percentage. They were buried right outside. The reason they're so commingled is they go in with a road grader or a scoop, one of those big pieces of equipment, load that into all these however many transfer cases or caskets that they intend to turn over, and they turn them over. So it's there are definitely similarities to some aspects of the Korean War, but that's about the only one with
Yeah,
the known prisoners who didn't return.
sure. So this, you described the motivation to persist in this. You use the word finality, to bring some sense of finality to family members
Right.
who lost a loved one in a conflict. You use the phrase "return to families," and so that's a
It's ending uncertainty. That's what it is.
I'm sorry.
Ending the uncertainty.
Yeah.
So that's why the law requires all information that pertains or may pertain to any given individual must be provided to the primary next of kin. It's because there will be cases when all you're ever going to get is what is known about the effort that was made to try to account for them. But there's 1587 Vietnam right now. There's been 1587 since July 26th of 2019. Inexcusable if it's a priority, as it is a stated priority.
Still unaccounted for, you're saying, that number?
Yeah.
Still unaccounted for.
Yeah.
So there's...
But about 700 or so of those are, I don't know how many, 500 to 700 or something, are believed unrecoverable at this point, unless new information comes up. So even out of the 1587, maybe 500, 600 are not ever going to be accounted for, and they have documentation as to why, that the families supposedly have all been provided.
Yeah. So I have two more questions for you. This one is related to what you're just saying. I mean, a key thing that just keeps you going, that has kept you going. One, we want our service people to know that we're not going to give up on them and we're going to bring them home. Secondly, that sense of finality for the families, understanding we're not going to get 100%, but we want to get as much as we can. In your decades of experience, and I can't think of a good way to pose the question, and so I'll just pose it, just pose it as it is in my mind. But
sure,
you've seen this many times over the years, that on Monday the person doesn't know, but then word comes in, we have remains, we have positively identified them, and now the person knows. To the person who gets that information, now I know, now I have that sense of finality. How does that, I don't know really how to frame the question, but how is that Tuesday, now I know, different from the Monday I didn't know? On Monday I didn't know, on Tuesday I know. What personal difference does that make? How does that affect the individual to get that knowledge?
Well, there's no one case that's the same.
Sure.
That's number one. So it depends on whether you or not you have confidence. If it's an identification and it is a solid identification, they're going to come out and brief you, the scientist as well as the casualty officer, to brief you on what they recovered, how it was identified, and why it is your relative. If, on the other hand, it is information that they're no longer going to be actively pursuing the case, and here are the reasons why, and here's what we believe happened, then it depends a lot on whether or not you have confidence in the process and the people telling you that. And that depends a lot on what your experiences have been over the years. I mean, in the case of the Vietnam War, so many people were lied to. All of the cases early on that were missing in Laos and Cambodia that were like Special Forces and others. We weren't there. They were told they were missing in South Vietnam. Other stories, or North Vietnam, whatever. What I'm saying is, it depends on the personal case. It depends on the person, the primary next of kin's view concerning trustworthiness and capability. In terms of identification process, there have been many accusations of misinformation or misidentification, and even purposeful misidentification. I've been around SIL since beginning of time and helped it expand over the years to the huge process it is today. I know the capabilities, and the League has always come to the defense of strongly the scientific capability of the Central Identification Laboratory, as it used to be called, now a DPAA lab. So we know their capabilities, and we have confidence in those.
Yeah.
Where they got into trouble was trying to control everything. And that meant everything in the field. And I said, no, hold it. We have a process here. It's a balanced process. It's not just a recovery operation here. And it should not be controlled by any one element. It should be, you have DIA Stony Beach special investigators. You have field operators who specialize in recoveries. You have the scientists. But it should be a collaborative thing, not one controlling element who tells everybody else what to do.
Yeah.
They don't even, at this point, the structure is so upside down in DPA, and they are once again working on it, and hopefully we'll get to what was originally agreed to, so that you have policy guiding the operational execution. So right now that doesn't exist, and right now operational directors are in fact doing their own thing with whatever they decide to do. That's backwards, and it's not sustainable. And you see different interests being served. I'm not saying they're being traitors or anything else. I'm just saying there's a level of ignorance there if you don't know a lot about the issue. So it's the educational aspect.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to come about. Everything takes too long when you're dealing with a bureaucracy. The education process, the institution, by the time that I have to give up and get out because I'm too old to continue, I don't know. I'm hoping for
that. Let's go to the case where somebody has high confidence that the info that's come is right and it's legitimate. Is the response from that person, would you describe it, and again, I understand different individuals, but generally speaking, would you describe it as sort of
relief,
a burden that falls off the shoulders kind of thing?
Relief. It happened to me. I mean, but I was relieved the year before they actually recovered miraculously a rib bone of my brother's. And it was a long process, but it took many years to even find the actual plane because nobody knew where it went. And it was a fluke. Nothing is a fluke. God knows everything, right? But a Vietnamese fisherman got tripped up on underwater aircraft wreckage.
Right.
After many dives and much effort, we knew it was probably one of two, but we didn't know which one.
One of two planes?
What?
One of two planes?
Yeah, one of two incidents. There were twin incidents, both of them off the aircraft carrier, both of them in the same area. But when they snagged it, then they finally pulled up a canopy frame off of the back canopy. Two men in the plane, Navy pilot and radar intercept officer, as it was called.
Right.
But they had a canopy frame. Knowing the process and the capability for underwater photography and how they did it, I immediately, when I heard about it, and I heard about it right away by the friends I've known for 100 years, saying that they had found a canopy frame with some letters on it. So I called out and just told somebody I knew out there, said, I understand you've got photographs and you've got a canopy frame with letters on it. Can you get those over to the Armed Forces Life Sciences Equipment Lab? Reason being, I knew they had the records on that twin incident, Navy and they had a Navy specialist, but they had all the records so they'd know exactly which plane it was immediately.
Right.
I was told, we can't do that. I said, excuse me, why not? Well, the lab won't let us. I said, wrong answer. I said, you tell them they've got 2 hours to get it over to them, or they will be sorry.
It's the bureaucratic nonsense, right? That
Yeah, nonsense.
Yeah.
Both agencies of the U.S. government, both long involved in this issue.
Yeah.
So, to keep their little self-imposed restriction in place, 5 minutes before the 2 hours were up, guess who got the photographs? Me.
Mm.
That way they're releasing them to the next of kin instead of another government agency. And I said, you jerks. So I flipped them over to Life Sciences Equipment Laboratory, and a week later we had a thorough report because it happened to be right before a league annual meeting. So we knew they had the plane.
Yeah.
That really didn't answer anything though. And the reason being, it was previously not a known location, but they didn't have anything that would indicate there was anybody in a plane or any scraps of a plane other than that. So did anybody bail out? Was there anything else? Well, when they finally, a few years later, they could only go there once a year. Well, a few years later, they got remains of a pilot, Jim Bowder. When they did that, I said, okay, that ends the uncertainty. They were in the aircraft, it went in, it's a huge underwater field, but if it got Bowder, then they may or may not get my brother.
Because he was the pilot and your brother was the radar intercept officer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Either way, we knew at that time where they went in, that there were people aboard the plane. Chances of anybody getting out different from that, vague. Nobody had ever heard or seen anything concerning this incident or any reports or anything. So I said, okay. They said, well, we're going back next year because you could only go once a year because of the underwater, you couldn't see anything. So they said they're going back next year. I said, okay, one more try, but if you don't get it, I'm going to sign a waiver, no more effort, because we now know the uncertainties ended. We know he was in that aircraft with Jim Bowder. We got Jim Bowder. We know what happened to my brother. And so they said, well, the lab's not going to let you do that. And I said, don't tell me that. I'll sign a waiver. I want the effort put on to somebody else who doesn't know anything to end the uncertainty. Well, fortunately, they did find biblically a rib bone, and it did match the DNA that my mother and sister had many years before deposited with Armed Forces DNA ID.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was a miraculous and unexpected.
Sure.
It gave other families who don't know anything at all a lot of hope, a real lot of hope that they could, because nobody thought, U.S. government or families or anything, thought anybody would ever get my brother.
So what I find impressive just listening to this is then someone would have said, oh, okay, well, 2018, by that point you had been at this for decades and your own particular case was resolved, and so you're done. But you're still
No, my brother's case was never the motivation. My brother's case was the entry ticket to be a member of the National League of Families, and that was in 1970 when it was formed. And my parents were at the formation meeting, and so we were all, I was active from the minute my parents came back. I was then a California coordinator and a regional coordinator, ran for the board, all of that. And then I came, and the reason why is my dad got leukemia. I was the designated Mills family person who had the greatest flexibility. I was divorced. My children were old enough. And the youngest son came with me. He was 8 at the time. So I could do it. And I didn't know how much I didn't know. And I had at least some familiarity from being on the board of directors and a league official for all those years. Plus, my dad had taught me that I could do whatever I needed to do. It never occurred to me I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So
So your your brother's own case was the entry into the organization, but that
It's because of the principles involved.
but your mission is broader. There's a broad
It's
principle involved.
principles involved that I already spelled out.
Yeah.
Our nation has an obligation to do this. The American people have an obligation to support those who defend our country, and the families of those who put their life on the line for our country deserve answers. You put all that together, those are pretty compelling reasons, and they are the reason that I kept at it all these years. My dad tried to talk me out of country. He said, it's too frustrating, it's too hard, it will kill you. And sure enough, he died much younger than I am now from leukemia, not that long after he had his 1 year. So he was only here for 1 year as executive director.
Well,
but I believe in it. That's why.
Yeah.
That's the reason. It's the right thing to do for the country, for our military, and for the rest of the world. Signal that the American people stand behind those who serve our country, period. End of conversation. And especially if left behind with evidence of capture or missing in action, and you know the primary responsibility in this case, Vietnam War, was with Vietnam. Not that China and Russia don't still have information they should provide, and that's why I'm a commissioner on the U.S.-Russia Joint Commission. But also why it's important for U.S. officials today and those students that are coming into the process, particularly in the Department of State. This is not just a military issue. And this also is, it's a national security issue. It is a policy issue. It has every one of those things wrapped into doing what's right for our country. That's the reason.
Doing well for the country while also doing good.
Yeah.
Individuals within the country, yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm, I just believe in it. And boy, there's a lot of times when, it was hard to be very nice. And there have been a few people that got fired because they got exposed for incompetence, their own fault. But sure.
No, I mean, this is the issue where we need everybody on deck to be operating at a level of excellence, right?
If not excellence, at least principles and purity of rationale for your engagement, for your involvement. If you don't have that, you're not going to do a good job. And if you don't have the education, you should not be. And I don't mean a PhD or a master's. I'm talking about realistic education about the people you're dealing with, if you're going to be dealing with them, and their culture and their record on cooperation as bounced against what you know from U.S. evidence and assessment of what's available. When you're talking Vietnam, 90% of everybody missing from the Vietnam War is in areas of responsibility controlled by the Vietnamese during the war. That includes the areas of Laos and Cambodia, where they had control.
Yeah. Let me ask you my final question is a question that I usually put to the Vietnam veterans that I interview. It's almost always the last question. You're obviously not a combat veteran, although I guess,
I've had more combat than most.
Yeah, you have been engaged in a kind of combat related to the Vietnam War. You certainly remember the Vietnam War. You have a living memory of it. It's hard. It'll be hard for you to believe, and probably it's hard for me to believe that I have students now who are too young to remember 9/11. They don't have a memory of 9/11. It's hard to believe. So for them, Vietnam is a distant abstraction. Let me bring you into my classroom, and you've got 2 or 3 minutes to tell young people today what you think is important about the Vietnam War. What should they know about that war? And veterans respond to this question in different ways. What do you think?
I think what's important for them now is really lies more with senior. I got the answer from many directions, including ASEAN foreign ministers and others that I met along the way and worked with, and thanks to Childress and Armitage and all the others, and the things that I was involved in, which is not going to be a normal answer.
Right.
But I think what is important for today's students that are much too young to remember anything because they weren't born for decades after,
Yeah.
is that the American rationale for being engaged in that war had nothing to do with conquest or taking over a country. It had everything to do with stopping communism and allowing people to make their own choices. And in fact, the reality of U.S. involvement did help many of the ASEAN countries that are free today and would be otherwise communist, more like the values that went into World War II to stop the spread of Nazism and totalitarianism.
Yeah.
So it gave them a chance to get on their feet and to have sustainable democratic principles in the majority of the ASEAN countries. Never would have existed. They would have been communist controlled countries.
Are you thinking especially of Singapore and Thailand?
Oh, Malaysia, all of them, Indonesia, all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so therefore it was true. The theory of the domino theory of communism,
Yeah.
look at what China's doing today and ask yourself. But they're doing around the world today.
That's right. The domino theory is often casually dismissed. I'm not sure that it's wise to casually dismiss.
It's going on today.
Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't dismiss it at all.
Yeah.
I saw it. I've seen it now. I mean, people that go on cruises today talk to the local people at all these places, and they're shown this gorgeous new airport or new shipping terminal or this and that. Oh, the Chinese built it for us. Believe me, that's not for free.
Yeah, yeah.
They'll never be able to repay it. They'll be owing to the Chinese forever. The expansion of economic and military strength by the PRC right now should be of concern to every American.
Well, which brings us back to where we were at the beginning, the importance of the United States forging relationships or strengthening relationships with those countries. And I'm, in my own mind, I think especially of Vietnam, which then leads me again, just to reflect on the admiration I have for you. I admire people who just persevere at something that's worthwhile. I mean, over any period of time, let alone over decades. The important role you've played in helping to forge this relationship with Vietnam, the focus on this issue that even in an age as fractured and divided as ours, I still think that most Americans, close to all of them, I think, would agree that this mission is an important one. And so it's still, at least,
if they're aware of it, yeah.
Yeah, that it's something that can unite folks. So I really appreciate you taking this time. I really appreciate it. It's been a real honor and privilege to talk with you.